you've described yourself as neither an atheist nor a theist.
Yes,
In the conventional sense,
that's
you're
right.
kind of unhappy with both. Could you
Yes.
tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of presuppositions that are shared by what I would call common current theism. Theism has a rich and varied history, and the theism of today is definitely not the same theism that's around in Augustine's time or so forth. But anyways, there's shared presuppositions between both the atheist and the theist, and there's a few that I find problematic. One is uh, the equation of the sacred with the supernatural, and the other is is that we should understand God as some kind of super being, super person, where what we mean by person is an individualized substance, um, and that our proper relationship to this God is primarily one of belief, believing whether or not propositions about him or her or it are true or false. So those three presuppositions are shared by the common current theist and the common current atheist. And I reject both of those as being a very inadequate way of trying to describe and explain people's experiential realization of sacredness and the ontology of ultimate reality that seems to correspond to that experience. I reject all three of those presuppositions.
So, when you have problems with the word supernatural,
Yeah.
or like God has to be. Tell me more about that.
So, this is a long history. The problem when you're talking about God is you're talking about one of the longest histories of all. And so, the axial revolution, around 800 BC to 300 BC, you get an emergence of an idea of that we are creatures that are inherently prey to self-deception, self-destructive behavior, and we inflict violence and suffering upon the world. And that the world we inhabit in our everyday experience is therefore largely a fallen world, a decadent world, an illusory world. There's lots of variations on this. So I'm trying to pick some very central terms. And that what we have to do is we have to wake up or get enlightened or get redeemed or get rescued. There's various metaphors from this everyday world to the upper world. Now, as time goes on, there's more and more reflection on what's the relationship between the everyday world and the upper world. And what happens in the Middle Ages is the lower world goes from being a merely decadent, illusory world to being a world that exists in its own right. This is the rise of what's called natural philosophy, just after the time of Thomas Aquinas, in which it's because of the rediscovery of Aristotelian science. No, this world, this everyday world of our everyday experience, really exists, and there's real knowledge in it that we can acquire through through science, basically. And of course, science is going to start evolving very rapidly. The problem then becomes, okay, well, if this world's real, what's the upper world anymore? Well, it has to be sort of more or other. It can't be the same, because then you could just reason your way to God, and you need revelation, you wouldn't need religion, you wouldn't need transformation. And so the hypothesis grew that the upper world, that's what super means, it means above, supernatural. The upper world above the natural world was actually also completely real, but real in a completely other way, worked according to different principles and patterns and processes that were in no way accessible by reason and science. And so you got the notion then that that is the proper domain of God, and that sacredness is therefore the disclosure into the natural world of events or processes from the supernatural world. Now, I totally reject that, not because I reject the idea of self-transcendence or the idea that we are beset by self-deception. I take those very seriously, and that we need enlightenment or awakening. But I reject the idea of this fundamental ontology in which there are somehow two utterly different and incommensurable and ultimately incommunicable realities that are held together by incomprehensible magic. Because I think that undermines one of the central and abiding cross-cultural and cross-historical intuitions then intelligibility is our best mark of what's real, our ability to render things intelligible. So that's why I think of thinking if we think of God as ultimate reality, as the most real, we have to think of God as having a pronounced, important relationship of communion with the intelligibility of the world, not some radical dualistic separation from it.
It almost seems like the notion in the Middle Ages, you say, where the lower levels and like, science and natural philosophy, and then we can kind of build up to God.
Yeah.
But then also, like, as you start building up to it, you're like, well, does it exist then? Like, what do we need the God for?
Yes,
Sounds like the opposite, like a reversal of the previous kind of,
it is.
maybe a kind of
That's exactly right.
Platonism.
That's exactly right, Jack. And so many critiques. I mean, this is the center of Nietzsche's critique and Heidegger's critique, right? If God is just like, for example, prototypically in Descartes, if God is sort of the capstone of your system, then is that really God? It's just an important part of your system, and the system is way more important than any God. And that God isn't the ultimate reality. God is just some important instrument for your system. And so it really undermines any connection to what people feel like they are encountering when they encounter sacredness, which is the really real that calls them to transformation and transcendence.
Mm. I heard you talk with JP Marceau recently, and there you touched on a point of, could we think of God as not perfect?
Yes.
And in some sense changing with the world, and I don't know if that's heretical according to Christian or typical
Yeah.
theologies, but it was very curious, and I wanted to learn more about that.
So one of the things, and first of all, I want to thank JP. It's always a great pleasure to talk with him. He's completely gracious and good faith interlocutor, and I hope I show up the same way for him because he deserves it. I was exploring with him one of the things we inherited from Plato, is who had give us a particular version of this two worlds. Was the idea that the upper world is the real world because it's perfect, it's unchanging, it's not because he equated change with opinion and sensation, and those are variable and highly prone to error. And if the real world was real, ultimately real, it wouldn't be subject to that kind of problem. So it had to be absolutely perfect. So all the circles we ever encounter in the everyday world, none of them are perfect circles, but we judge them as being good or bad circles, presumably in how well they approximate to that perfect circle. And Plato said that's what the upper world is made up of. It's made up of these what he called the eidos, the forms. It's made up of these perfect forms. And this got taken up into Judaism and Islam and Christianity, is that God is perfect. God is absolutely unchanging in a fundamental way. He, she, it. I'll just see he from now on, so I don't keep having to do that because that's just tradition. He does not need anything or desire or want for everything because he is complete. He is finished. He is utterly beyond change. So eternity was understood as this kind of that being outside of time and space meant you're changeless. The problem I had with that, as I expressed it to JP, is that seems to undermine of like our experience of realness. So I mean, I consider myself a Neoplatonist, but here's one area where I don't agree with Plato. Reality seems to be not what is complete, but exactly the opposite. It seems to be that which is an inexhaustible source of intelligibility. So, for example, which is a real stick, the shadow or the wooden stick? Well, the wooden stick, because I can learn so much more about wooden sticks from the wooden stick than I can from the shadow. And the wooden stick explains the shadow stick, but the shadow stick doesn't explain the wooden stick. And then when I started thinking, oh, and this is a Neoplatonic argument, then all of reality, right, has to come from this inexhaustible, infinitely inexhaustible source. And the only way I can make sense of infinitely inexhaustible is not that it's perfect or static, but that it's ever flowing, that it is ever creative, always producing the new, not like, well, I'll stop there. I think you've got the basic idea. And so, if our experience of realization is to encounter something that has an inexhaustible depth and an inexhaustible creativity to it, then we should think of God, if we think of God as ultimate reality, as the fount of that, as Ibn Gabirol, a famous medieval Jewish Neoplatonist philosopher, argued. And you think the thing about JP is he said, yes, God is inexhaustible and creative and vibrant that way. And I said, yeah. And and I think that's what the Bible and other sacred texts try to capture by calling him a living God. But I said, how does that go with him being unchanging? That was the problem. Did that help, or was that
Yeah.
make it worse?
It brought out some things, right? Because as you say, there's like a living God, and then
Yeah.
like that problem, right? Of yeah, where could you sort of go to? You keep learning about like whatever your example sticks, but just you keep
Yeah.
learning about the depths of the reality. But then is there a point where it's like now you touch? Oh, this is the maybe it reminds me of Jim Filler's and then relational metaphysics,
Of
right?
course.
Like
That's
maybe
James. That's
it's
James's
not
thing. Yeah.
there's not some substance that you're going to get to. Like this is the bottom of reality, right?
Yeah, and this is what I meant by being apophatic all the way through, not just after the fact. It's you don't just get to the threshold and say, "Oh well, there's this perfect substance that's beyond my grasp." It's like, no, no, no. I'm forever moving because God is forever beyond, right, the capacity of being exhausted. So it's a different kind of apophatism. It's not one that just says, I have to stop because God is so perfect. It says, I don't ever stop. My apophatism, right, is that God's inexhaustible. And this, of course, is the position of Ionaris and other people that come from the Greek Orthodox tradition, that they tend to emphasize that. And when they say God is personal, to go back to a couple of the other criteria, they are emphatic. I mean, explicitly emphatic that they do not mean an individualized substance. They mean that God is that kind of reality that calls us to transformation, that calls us to responsibility.
Mm. I wonder, and people have kind of pushed me on this. Is God a useful term? Like, how do you define it? I suppose historically we've talked so much about the term, but like, if there is such a this like deep source of intelligibility, like maybe does it even map onto
Well,
typical conceptions of God? And then,
well, there's been others. I mean, of course, the Neoplatonists had the one, Plato had the good, and the Neoplatonists said the one and the good are the same. Taoism has the Tao, and there's Brahman and Vedanta. And there's nothing like a personal, an individualized substance guy that is a god in Buddhism, but there's Shunyata in Zen, which is very similar, as James Filler noticed, to the Neoplatonic one. So we've actually had a variety of names for this. And part of what I'm trying to do in the Philosophical Silk Road, it's like there's a famous story by Arthur C. Clarke, The 9 Billion Names of God. And I'm trying to enter into a proper, I just don't want to, I'm not just trivially trying to find out what all the different names are, not what the beliefs are. I want to try as much to encounter what the names are getting me to face, and allowing what that reality is to call to me. That's what the Philosophical Silk Road is all about. That's the project I've been engaged in for quite a while now.
one thing I'm really interested in, and it will link to discussion of, okay, we're not thinking just about lower level like atoms. We're quite reductionistic
Yeah.
sometimes in say science, and so then like it feels like then you kind of would want to engage in high level realities, like you have talked about, and I talked
Yeah.
with JP Marceau about the nature of angels. Like we've talked about churches, cities in the past having angels and gods and
Yeah.
these realities, right? But then even sometimes bringing up those words, spirits, angels, gods, sounds a bit absurd, and sometimes, or like,
Yes.
what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
When we have a typical sort of materialist stance, and I just wonder how to think about these sort of properly and like
Sure.
helpfully.
Well, I mean, on the ontological side, I mean, there's lots of arguments, and we could go into them if you want, about why I don't think reductionism works. Why reality, I mean, the metaphor is reality is leveled or has layers. It's really a continuum, and there's a vertical continuum between lower levels and upper levels. We could do that. Or on the cognitive side, you can say, well, we've moved, a lot of people in cognitive science have moved to 4 ECOG side, the idea that cognition is between the organism and the world, not within us as a possession, but it's between us as the world and us participate in the same dynamical system, the same dynamical coupling. And that is much more consonant with biological notions of adaptivity and so on. And I've made those arguments. And part of that 4E is the notion of extended, which is our cognition is taking place. Once you say it's between, it's also taking place between and through. And so the classic example of that, Ed Hutchins, who navigates an ocean liner. Well, no one does. It's a dynamical system of people and tools and the ship that can manage the really complex hyper pattern of the Atlantic Ocean and the atmosphere, because those are really big and really complex, and we need a dynamical system. So, and now there's rigorous arguments, mathematical arguments by Hole and my friend Jim Rutt, basically showing that these collective systems have what's called distributed cognition. They have a capacity to access information and solve problems that is non-reducible to any kind of summation of of the individual human beings within the system. Um, this is what's called causal emergence. So, and they have unique information access. So you have to say things like, and Dan Chiappia and I did this in 3 papers we published about the NASA scientists using the rovers on Mars. You have to say that somehow this collective intelligence, which is in the distributed cognition, just the way the internet is distributed amongst all these computers. It's not in any computer, it's distributed among them. In the same way as the internet exists, you have a agent, a collective intelligence that has informational access and problem-solving capacities that the individuals are participating in and are in some sense in service to. Well, that sounds a lot like indigenous and ancient talk about spirits. And then if you say, well, maybe some of those spirits could act as messengers, meaning maybe they act as a way, as intermediaries of one of the problems they might solve is helping us to know what's more real. Well, that's what the word angel means. It's a messenger. So you have you have a collective intelligence that is addressing the problem of trying to help us individually and collectively transcend towards what is more real. And then that becomes very plausible. Now, where I differ from Jonathan and JP is I don't think angels and spirits can exist independent of there being human beings. And so that's a fundamental ontological difference.
I like that, right. So a crew navigating a ship, and then that whole strange system of the crew and the tools, and they're all communicating, and
Yeah, yeah,
like and no one of them can actually understand. Like
yeah,
it's hard to navigate a ship, right? And then I guess you want to say that is a real thing.
yeah.
Like it's hard to kind of point to. It's a little odd, but there's something actually genuine about that, and they, without it, they wouldn't be able to navigate the ocean. So
Exactly. And what if the ocean you're trying to navigate, and here I'm punning on Aquinas, is not a aquatic ocean, but the ocean of God, the ocean of being. That's what Aquinas called God, an ocean of being. Not any particular being, but the ground, the ocean of being. And so I think it's reasonable that religions have created rituals whereby we cobble together collective intelligences that are tasked with trying to help us get in better connection and communion with greater patterns of reality.
Mm. Tell me more about angels, though, not existing without humans.
Well, this is where Dan and I did a lot of very careful work and thought and looked over a lot of this work. And the consensus among the cognitive science scholars, and Dan and I agree with these arguments, is that these collective intelligences are zombies in the philosophical sense. There is collective agency and collective intelligence, but there isn't a consciousness or a self-consciousness there that can exist autonomously on its own, the way your consciousness does and mine does. Now, that's not a that's those arguments are not arguments in principle. They're not arguments saying it's logically impossible. It's just that consciousness, as we understand it in ourselves or even in animals, requires certain kinds of ratios between complexity, bandwidth, speed of processing, et cetera, that plausibly just do not exist for these spirits and angels. So again, very much like, do you think the internet is conscious? Probably not, even though it demonstrates a very significant kind of collective intelligence and solves problems like you and I are talking because of it, right? So I don't think that when people are encountering angels, they are encountering beings that exist autonomously. Now, let me be very clear. On the opposite side, I don't think that those angels or spirits are properly understood as merely subjective psychological for all the arguments I've just given. So they don't fit cleanly into modernity's two categories, the clean carving up that the atheists and the theists both share today, that the world things are either subjective or objective. These spirits, like your cognition, are transjective in nature. They're neither purely subjective nor purely objective. And when you actually look into the phenomenology of people encountering such, I'm doing scare quotes for everybody, supernatural agents, what you repeatedly get is this phenomenological feature. They're me, but they're not me. They're other than me, but they're somehow me. They bleed into me and I bleed into them. Which, see, so that phenomenology sits much better with the theoretical framework I've given you than the traditional one. They purely objectively exist or they're merely subjective illusions.
Right. Because I've been reading the book Presence by
Oh,
Ben Alderson
okay, yeah,
Day, kind of from your
yeah,
recommendation.
yeah, excellent book.
And there's kind of people encountering angels and all different kinds of presences there.
Yeah,
And it's curious because then I suppose I kind of agree with you. What would it mean for if only a human can encounter an angel in that, like, there must be something part of your brain that's doing it, but then equally you're tapping into a real source of sort of intelligence and agency that's not just part of you, at
that's
least.
right. That's how I would
And
put it.
and
Yeah,
mm,
and you think about this that I think that rich biological ecologies, like the ones that indigenous people typically live in, are that kind of that are, especially when you have living things, they have a spirit. Like, it makes perfect sense to me, given this language and the care we're taking about it, to say that a forest has a spirit and that you could do things so that you get a better way of tracking, tracing, and working with that to solve your problems and to be properly oriented to the reality you find yourself in.
because when I was re-listening to your conversations with Jonathan Pageau from a few years ago on angels in scientific terms, and sometimes I wonder if you're not being reductionistic when I hear you now, though. But sometimes I go, if we reduce these kinds of beings too much, there's a kind of way in which we kind of de there's not enough bite to them. Like, we kind of go, oh, they're just cognition and they're just these
Ah.
distributed. But then it's like, but as you say, there's also genuine meaning, like that we get out of them, and they're like a necessity
Yeah.
to them.
So think about how this is more in continuity with you just, I imagine everybody's had this at least multiple times. You just had a profound insight. Where did that insight come from? Oh, like, is it you? Yeah. Is it just you? No, because you can't just will an insight to happen. Well, it comes from my unconscious. What does that mean? Do you think your unconscious is just psychological? Do you think that also has to do, because there's lots of empirical research shows that it has to do with your relationship to the environment, and that's happening unconsciously to you. See, and again, people don't realize. And do you find those kinds of insights meaningful? Of course you do. You find them some of the most meaningful experiences in your. Is that a reduction? I don't see how.
Mm. It's fascinating. Like I've heard you talk about talking with Hermes and
Yes.
the kind of
Yeah, and
this kind of
I get all kinds of
relationship.
slack for it. The Decoding the Gurus guys just, even though I'd been on their show and before that, and had sort of argued. Chris and I were on there together. Chris Master Pietro and I just sort of said,
Mm.
I'm committed to rationality. I'm committed to science, and they sort of agreed to that. But then they did this other piece, really raking me over the coals about that. It was just like okay.
Mm.
Um, I think in order to address what I'm talking about, you have to see if the framework given by the European Enlightenment of modernity, that, for example, tries to cleanly and exhaustively and completely and perfectly cut the world up into subjective or objective, or into fact and value, and all that, whether or not that framework is actually viable. Because if you pay attention to all the analytic philosophy, all the history, all the religious studies, all the cross-cultural anthropological work, that framework actually is collapsing radically right now. And so everybody has the right to criticize me. Of course they should, and they do, and I respond to it. Like I said, I went on their show. But the thing about it is, right, if what's really going on is you disagree with the challenge to the modern framework, let's talk about that first. Okay, that would be fair. If you just radically assume it to criticize me when you know full well that I have been consistently and publicly criticizing it, then you're just being unfair to me. I just wanted to state that.
Yeah, it's really helpful. You say that, like, because from my experience, like some of the problems I've had with sort of standard religions and like even what kind of brought me to do like psychedelics and things,
Mhm.
but then not having necessarily good experiences with it all the time, but kind of because like when you have some kind of unsatisfying explanations for things, then like you go out. It's we need roadmaps, right?
Yes.
And I find it really like um encouraging that you kind of talk about um like your experiences. And I've talked to Anderson Todd as well,
Yeah.
and like his practice is just, I've had beautiful conversations with him.
Well,
Like
as everybody does who talks to them. Jack, I don't want. I didn't want to. I hope I didn't. I hope I didn't come off as aggressive. I'm happy to talk to you about Hermes. I just wanted to make it clear the context in which I think I'm being treated fairly, as opposed to being treated unfairly.
mm, no, and I didn't know too much about that sort of counter, or like the incident on this podcast. But I guess I'm interested in that because I'm, like we talked about, God right at the start, right? And I'm wondering, okay, like how does it help one to kind of think about the nature of like intelligibility, and like if you start thinking about kind of hierarchies of a reality, like then there's actually, you're not kind of alone, right? And you could potentially, like, because again, you also, is this helpful? Because there's also a way in which you could encounter higher level realities that are actually like damaging, or like
Oh, sure,
hard to understand,
sure.
and then you actually like are worse off. And I find that like that line very interesting.
Well, but see, this is exactly the issue, and this is the work of Kimbriel, and especially Charles Taylor, a premier Canadian philosopher. Modernity was born around creating the buffered self, a self that was worked in terms of its autonomy. It was protected, it was invulnerable, and it only related to the world in terms of control and certainty. Precisely because it wanted to rule out being interfered with, possessed, misdirected by those, like you said, we'll call them neutrally higher forces or patterns, Why? Well, because the very bloody, and I'm not being vulgar, I'm being literal, the very bloody religious wars had just happened in which people had been creating one of the worst hell on earths possible over, and they were captured by what you could call spirits that were destructive and demonical. Again, I, I'm
Mm.
using these words in the sense we're talking here. So, but what happens is you want to say, no, 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 we don't want to do that anymore. We're going to create a secular world, and people are going to be autonomous, self-governing. They're going to be protected and buffered so that they can't be overtaken by that kind of collective madness ever again. Of course, that doesn't work as it comes back, Nazism and communism. But on the other hand, the other risk you pay is, as you just said, yes, but you also cut yourself off radically. You cut yourself off radically from sources of self transcendence, things that can help you overcome biases because they're outside of your perspective and therefore can question and probe you and lead you beyond yourself the way a wise individual can. And so, you have to replace the security of a buffered self with a wise with a wise discernment of a vulnerable self, and that's very different. And notice how that language is already appropriate for just being in love with somebody. You can't go into that relationship with a buffered self looking for control and certainty and maintaining its invulnerability. You instead have to go for wise discernment. You're going to be porous. You're going to bleed into this person. They're going to bleed into you. They're going to get into your very patterns, the very grammar of how you think and move and have your being in the world. And see, this is why we have so much problems with friendship and romantic love. Where do they fit in our framework? They don't. So, yes, you have to be very careful of orienting yourself with wisdom. You have to have you I give the same advice for these kinds of dialogical encounters because I get more and more people who are not crazy, by the way, who are virtuous, sane, productive, creative people who are having these kinds of dialogical relationships. You have to, like, they almost always have large sets of practices, mindfulness practices and imaginal practices and reasoning practices in order to deal with significant temptations of bias and self-deception.
Mhm.
That is all also part of the context in which I talk about, like interactions with Hermes or people meeting Sophia or Socrates having his daemon, all the conversations I had with Charles Tang. Yeah.
Mm. I was just watching them. So how would you explain Hermes and does Hermes help you in, overcome biases and
Yeah.
how?
Yeah.
I'm
No,
curious.
for me, I encounter, experience, realize. All the words are a little bit hard because we give them this modernist meaning, this dichotomous meaning, this dualistic meaning. It's so ironic, eh? We have rejected the dualism of the supernatural and the natural only to surreptitiously replace it with the dualism between the inner and the outer, as if that horizontal dualism is any better than the vertical dualism we ridicule. It's so ridiculous, actually. So, for me, um, it's like Hermes, there's an aspect of Hermes that is coming up from me archetypally from within, but also paradigmatically from without. So, at the level, like, say, of my intuition, it's my intuition picking up on complex implicit patterns, which we know intuition does. At the level of my inspiration, right? It's that in me that is capable of indwelling and being indwelt by things, the way you pick up other people by indwelling them, and it's resonating with the fact that the world is actually a world of participation. Things are participating in each other. At the level of my intellect, it's my intelligence in resonance with the intelligibility of the world. At the level of self transcendence, it's the way my insight is in resonance with the fact that the world is transcending itself. So this is the metaxu, the between of Hermes. And when when I'm talking with him, when I'm writing dialogues, I feel like things are simultaneously welling up from within and breaking into me from without. And he has done a lot to help me overcome many biases in like really like really clear way. And he also he's my philosophical conscience. He helps me become aware of radical misframings that are part of how I'm deceiving myself about things. One of the dialogues I had with Hermes, he said, "John, you keep trying to make God. You keep trying to build up practices and theories that are going to make God. And if God is God, God has to be sacred. God has to take shape, take on a life of his own. Because if it's in your control, like John, you're not listening to the things you're saying." And that hit me really hard. It hit me as hard as if Sarah, my beloved partner, was to say those things to me. Now, you could say, well, that's a part of your mind speaking to you. Yeah, but it's also all the work I've done in the world and all the things people in the world have said. Hermes, hermeneutics, systems of meaning, that's Hermes, right? So that's an example.
Hmm. Right, the mind is just something inside your skull in some way. So like this, yeah, this the inside outside dichotomy we have. Um, I wonder why you would have this relationship with Hermes now. Is it because of a certain time in your life?
Yeah.
Or was it always there?
I think it came. I mean, there's a proximate cause, which is I was doing a lot of internal family systems therapy, a lot of imaginal parts work, and that already gets you into that sort of framing. I'm going to be talking with Dick Schwartz about IFS. So I think there was that. I think I was also I was also pivoting religiously. Um, I wouldn't have said it then, but I'd say it now. And I was coming increasingly uh, into understanding because I do all this work on the non-propositional kinds of knowing about that I was seeking a non-propositional kind of knowing and being known by God, ultimate reality, however you want to talk about it. That um, and and also I had become very convinced because of a lot of the work I'd done on the extended nature of cognition and the dialogical nature of the self. And I've been doing a lot of practices, dialectic into dialogos and so forth, that have developed that dialogical nature, that metaxu that Socrates talks about. And I think all of those things, well, again, within me or without me or both, came together. And that's the point. It's neither just within me or just without me. It's between. It all came together. That's my best my best answer to your question. I want to congratulate you on that. I hope that doesn't sound condescending, because that's the first time anybody ever asked me that question, and I appreciate that.
On
Yeah.
when you
Why do you think then?
why?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, as you talk about having too propositional an understanding of God and ultimate reality, it kind of makes me scared, not in a bad way, but curious too. Of like, me and my friends are constantly, going to the pub after church and then, discussing theology endlessly, and it can be a fun and enjoyable and good. But then, like, I wonder what does it mean to you to not do that, like to encounter living reality
Well,
with God?
I mean that goes back to the now we've touched on the third thing, the idea that the primary relationship to God is one of believing in propositions about God. Um, I mean, just to look at first of all, just look at the word belief comes from beleben, which is to give your heart to, uh, beloved. Um, and we make a distinction. We struggle, although many people don't reflect on what's being conveyed by the distinction between believing and believing in. Where believing in means you are giving your heart, where giving your heart means you are that there's that vulnerability. I'm willing to bleed into the person and to let them bleed into me. I'm willing to indwell them and have them indwell me, which is, by the way, how you become a person. You get your you like you are a person because you can reflect on yourself. How did you get that ability to stand back and look at your own perspective? You got that as a little kid because what you did is you imitated adults who knew more than you and the perspective they took on you. And you imitate that until you internalize that and until you can do it for yourself. Um, that, and it turns out, by the way, that that is what predicts whether or not people are religious or not. It's not whether or not they're analytic or associational in their thinking, or they're wishful thinking, or hyperactive agency detecting, or all the explaining away. And this was research. This is empirical research, high end, large number. I teach on this, right? And this was done by atheists. Well, what predicts if somebody is religious is whether or not they have somebody in their life that, and listen to the language, that they look up to, who's doing things they don't understand that seem to be very costly in some way. And then they say, I have to imitate them so that because I trust them, they're trustworthy, they're wiser than me. And by doing that, I will grow up. I will be able to transcend the perspective that I'm trapped in right now. And so the non-propositional is a recognition of that what really gets us is not the propositions we believe, but how we, like these three words, truth. And remember, truth has originally a relational meaning. I am true to you, or this is true gold. It's real. I'm in touch with something real, right? Truth and troth, like I'm betrothed to somebody, and trust. They all have the same origin. And it's that sense of I'm trothed to you. I trust you. I'm true to you. I will let you indwell me, and I want to indwell you. That gives you your perspectival knowing. That gives you your metacognition. That turns you into a person and into a reflective self. That's way more important for meaning in life and getting in touch, listen to the language, in touch with reality, seeing what is real, than your propositions.
I really like that because it helped me understand a recent interest I have in recent living memory Christian saints, like particularly the past century. Like all my friends will know I've always been interested in angels and spirits and like this stuff, but maybe almost more scientifically. Like, what is it? But then like I was just kind of inspired by them. I'm like, yeah, sometimes baffled, sometimes a bit almost like have to almost push it away. Like that's ridiculous. Why would people sacrifice in this or that way? What would that do? But yeah, I'm just like learning so much about the way they live and going, okay, like there's something about them that
Yeah, that's I'm glad to hear that, because one of the things that our culture struggles with, because of all these great dichotomies and the buffered self, um, and a lot of other things that contribute to the meaning crisis, is they are many people feel bereft when they're looking for people that they can look up to. And again, that's the metaphor from when we're kids and we're literally looking up to adults. But the ancient world had a great saying: as the child is to the adult is to the sage, or the saint, if you want to make it Christian, right? And for many people, I sometimes ask them, and I don't ask them in a cruel way. I ask them, I hope, in a compassionate, respectful way. But who are your sages? Who are your saints? Who do you look up to as greater than you, that you want to indwell and have dwell within you? And the fact that you are, I mean, that speaks well of you, Jack, that you've sort of naturally come up with a way of looking for some individual. And the fact that they're in living memory is kind of interesting, because you want to have a personal encounter. You don't want to just have a propositional encounter with them. I think that's very telling. I think that bespeaks well of you.
it's very recent, and I've just been interested in Orthodox Christianity as well, which
Yeah.
I kind of like don't want to be because it's foreign to me. Like I've only recently sort of more become a Christian, but it's more from the evangelical tradition. But then like it just sort of kind of speaks to me. It makes a lot of sense, and
If
feels very living, the tradition.
if I were to become a Christian, I would be an Eastern Orthodox Christian. It is the form of Christianity that I feel the closest to. Part of that is because of two great friends, Jonathan Pajot and Bishop Maximus, who is an astonishing individual and a beloved friend, but also because of the rich philosophical heritage, the Neoplatonic Christianity, that is alive even up in today. People like Inaris and Norman Russell and people like that. I find it, and its emphasis on the non-propositional, whilst also being so theologically sophisticated, I think is really, really attractive. Really, really attractive.
Are there particular authors or ideas from that?
Well, like I said, I mean, I'm a big fan of Pseudo Dionysius. I don't like to call him that. Dionysius, the Areopagite. Really, his work is really powerful. Maximus the Confessor, of course, a whole bunch of authors from that tradition. But I'm very, very the two thinkers that are having the most impact on this end of my philosophy, the philosophy that deals with sacredness and ultimate reality and God, are William Desmond, who comes from the Latin sort of West tradition, and Inaris, who comes from the Greek or East Orthodox tradition. If I could properly integrate their work together, I think that would be one of the better accomplishments of my life.
What is sort of their work touching on, and what would it mean to what was your
Well,
aim there?
I've taught a course on William Desmond, and I'm recording a series of conversations with William Desmond. I believe we're becoming friends, and that's one of the great successes of my life. We have a line somewhere about, you should never meet your heroes, but I've met some of my heroes, and I've not been disappointed. His work is really around recovering from Plato, but also from modern and postmodern philosophy, especially cutting edge phenomenology. And so he's reaching way back and right to the cutting edge to recover this notion of metaxu, of participation and the porous nature of the self, that the self bleeds into the world and the world bleeds into the self. And that is how our experience really is. That is where meaning really is. That is where the contact with reality. And when you have the potential for contact with reality that can correct you and meaning that can sustain you, then you have the possibility of the cultivation of transcendence and wisdom. This is William Desmond. So being in the between, God in the between, like that, those are the titles of his book. He's an impressive, clear, insightful, profound thinker. The book by Ben Williams, is that it? Am I getting it right? Ben Simpson, sorry, on religion, metaphysics, and the philosophy of William Desmond is a great introduction if people are interested in William Desmond. And then Inaris. Inaris is about recovering the Eastern Orthodox, as he argues, and I talked to Bishop Maximus about this and Jonathan Pajot to make sure that it's a fair presentation, is that apophatism, that realizing that things transcend my cognition and my language, that there are aspects of reality that are non-propositional and even beyond my non-propositional control, that we shouldn't understand that as apophatism after the fact, but as from the very beginning going all the way through. And that faith isn't believing without evidence and argument. Faith is a sense of what processes do I inherently have to presuppose, because no matter what I do, even to criticize them is to use them. I'm always relying on them. And what are those processes? Those are the processes that demonstrate what Frankfurt calls a voluntary necessity, the way a really good argument of reason is compelling but not compulsive. You don't feel like you lose your agency when you say, yes, you're affirming yourself as you affirm the argument. Or beauty or love. I love Sarah profoundly. There's a necessity to me about that. But yet I don't feel like I'm losing my agency. I feel like I'm completely affirming who and what I'm supposed to be. Voluntary necessity at the core of reason, beauty, love, flow. And this is what Plato talked about. Plato talked about what is that nexus. And for Bishop Maximus and I, we had a conversation on the Philosophical Silk Road. It's on my chapter. That's faith. And that's the Eastern Orthodox notion, really pronounced. And that goes with the apophatism, because when I'm faithful to Sarah, I acknowledge that she will always transcend me. She will always be on my ground. That is why I love her, because she reliably draws what is best from me out of me, because in some ways she is beyond me. And she says, I am that for her. That's what Eastern Orthodox. And then the resolute point, the Inaris, person does not mean that God is an individual thing or substance. It means that God faces us. What's a face? A face is not a container in which the parts are found. This is from Wynne. When I face you, the meaning of who and what you are is in every part. The whole is in the part rather than the parts in the whole. So when ultimate reality faces us and calls to us and reorients us and awakens us to the fact and appeals to us, listen to the word appealing. It appeals to us that we have to transcend and transform in order to come into the deeper truths, into a greater contact with reality. That's how God is personal. That's what I hear in Eastern Orthodoxy.
It reminds me of when people talk about free will as something which, you to be able to do anything you want.
No,
Like
that's a ridiculous
you could do,
expression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the way you say it, it's like, there's like something which is like, it compels me, like an argument or, a beautiful thing compels me, but I'm not like, I don't know, it's not like, but it's like a good thing to be kind of like forced.
Because you are participating in that which compels you. So it is not undermining your agency, your selfhood, or your personhood, but calling it forth into itself more and more. Like when you fall in love with somebody. I'm not the same person I was when I first met Sarah. She's not the same person. We are different, and yet we continue to be faithful to each other and call to each other. We made a lifetime commitment to each other because we reliably bring out the good in each other.
So with this interested in Eastern Orthodoxy and all these ideas, I wonder how this relates to, and I'm not like confronting on this, but when Hermes, when you talk with Michael Phillip, kind of, you said Hermes talked about you being on a dark road back to Christianity.
Yes.
Or almost like, and so tell me about that.
And Hermes often, Hermes is a trickster. He's a virtuous trickster. He sometimes does stuff. He riddles and he tricks in order to break the box of bias that I'm in, right? Like you have to do when you're with kids. You have to be virtuously tricky with them because you have to sort of get around their childhood egocentrism. And if you do that lovingly and virtuously, people think you're a good parent. They don't think you're evil. When he said I'm on a dark road back, he didn't mean like evil or, I'm heading into Mordor or something like that. He meant that I can't see it because of where I am right now. And I think, well, I know because of the dialogue, it's part of what it takes to be on proper pilgrimage. See, the pilgrim is exactly the opposite of the original. Our word theory comes from theoria, which more originally, but earlier on meant not a statement. It meant a way of looking at things. It was a contemplation. But the most ancient meaning of theoria, and Plato uses both, is a pilgrimage. That's the ancient meaning. Because a pilgrim is somebody who moves away from the box and makes themselves vulnerable to being challenged and changed and potentially hurt. So a pilgrimage is in that sense a dark road. You have to be the opposite of a tourist. A tourist goes and wants the safety box placed around him or her when they get there so they can consume without threat pleasure. And, going on vacation is great. I've just got back from Cancun. That's very different from when I went on the Philosophical Silk Road. The Philosophical Silk Road, I knew I was going to get sick. I was going to get hurt. I was going to get shocked. I was going to have weird experiences. And you make yourself properly vulnerable to that, like you have to, again, if you're going to make a lifetime commitment to love somebody. They're going to hurt you. And if you say, I'll leave you if you hurt me, you don't love them. You don't love them. Imagine saying that to your kids. Now, you don't stay with somebody who's violent or manipulative or vicious in how they hurt you. But sometimes, and I mean this with affection, Sarah or my good friend Chris will hurt my feelings in a way that I recognize is genuinely good for me. That's what a pilgrimage does. And that's what Hermes meant by I was on a dark road. It's bound up with this pilgrimage that I have set myself on. And I won't know what the end of that is like until I am done.
Yeah. So many things, but like that, it reminds me of many places in Proverbs and
Yeah.
Wisdom of Sirach that you kind of want to be criticized by your friends, especially, and that's really treasured. But also, if you're criticized by someone that maybe doesn't know you, that can also like hurt you. There's also a kind of they can use it for violence, right? And
Yeah.
so
So, and I mean, and that's why we had an intermediary category of fellowship. Somebody was a fellow, which meant they're a stranger to me. They're not my friend, but they are coming in with a trustworthy commitment to good faith. So when they make a criticism of me, it's offered in good faith and it's offered as critique, not as attack. And we've lost the category of fellowship. We've lost it in our civil discourse. Our politics is nothing but attack and defend. We're always in the courtroom. We can never be in the courtyard where we are discussing things and challenging each other in the way you do when you're trying to educate each other. That's why our democracy is doomed, because when we've given up the idea that democracy is the education of our collective intelligence, that it is just a battlefield, then we are making our democracy stupid. And stupid democracy will do stupid things. And we have lots of history, ancient Athens, that makes it very clear about that. And so Aristotle said somebody isn't your friend if they make you feel good. Socrates said this, sorry. You should look for people who correct you out of love, who challenge you out of love. And they do it in a loving way. Because those are the people that really help you to get closer to the truth. Human beings as individuals, this is one of the problems with the buffered self and the idea of autonomy. And this is massive experimental and empirical evidence for this. We are absolute shit at determining our own self-deception and bias. We are very good at seeing it in other people, because when you're outside a perspective, you can see its limitations or flaws. So we need other people. And we also need to travel outside of our comfort zone. We need pilgrimage, and we need pilgrimage that puts us into deep dialogos with other people. That's what we need.
I also remember you recommending the Gospel of St. John on a podcast.
Yes.
And is that St. John in general you like or something about that gospel? Like, why did that intrigue you?
Well, I mean, here's where I'll be heretical, and even Jonathan Pajot and Bishop Maximus might not like it, but I mean, I trust them, and I hope they can trust me. I'm saying that because I've tried to adopt an existential policy of relationships matter more than propositions to me. I'm trying to live that. I don't always live up to it, but I aspire to that. So, I'm reading, and I'm greatly influenced by a guy by the name of Marshall Davis, or Davies, I think. And he presents the Gospel of John as a gospel of non-duality. And he presents Jesus. He's got a book called The Gospel of Jesus, in which he writes a gospel making use of the four canonical gospels and the Gospel of Thomas, but he tells it from first person, from Jesus' perspective. And he makes several good arguments why we need a gospel like that. And he presents Jesus as basically somebody that the kingdom of God is the realization, the awakening to non-duality and a profound kind of communal sense of being rather than an individualistic, dualistic sense of being. And in he makes a case in the Gospel of Non-Duality that that's what John is actually arguing for in the Gospel of John. And I think it also shows up in the epistles of John, especially when John comes to the conclusion that God is agape, one of the few very specific identity claims made in the Gospels. So that's why I like John. John, there's the wrestling with intelligibility. That's logos. In the beginning was the logos. Saying in the beginning the word makes people think it's the Bible. That's not what that means. It means in the beginning was intelligibility. That very intelligibility and that process of realization that is mythologically conveyed when God speaks and there's light as the very first thing he does. And so John's linking that intelligibility, and Jesus says, of course, I am the light of the world, I'm the life of the world. Right? He links that to the kingdom of God, and the kingdom of God and we have this really wonderful phrase, and both translations are equally legitimate, and I think both senses were intended. The kingdom of God is within you, and also the kingdom of God is between you or among you, which is really, really, really powerful. So that's why I like John a lot. I mean, I've read the Bible, the entire Bible, like 7 times. I've read the Gospels multiple times. I study them on an ongoing basis. I study many sacred texts on an ongoing basis. But and it's not just because of the name. I prefer John because John seems to catch the. I mean, there's aspects of Paul too. Where, in Christ it's not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And in Christ there is no Jew, no Gentile, no male, no female. Like he's breaking that. Christ somehow is the breaking down of all the dichotomies, and right, and we are the body of Christ. But I think John does an even better job of it, and so that's the aspect of it that really resonates for me, because I see that non-duality differently approached, but nevertheless convergently approached in Vedanta and Buddhism, and especially in Neoplatonism.
So when you say non-duality, could you tell me more? Like, and is the opposite duality? Like, is that how we
Yeah.
are they the
So,
alternatives?
like I've been making a non-dualistic point repeatedly throughout that, in Plato's sense of the metaxu, the between. So you get to this realization that for example, the dualism, the horizontal dualism of the inner and the outer, reality is cleanly and completely divided up into the subjective inner and the objective outer, inner values and outer facts. That's modernity. Modernity is just to replace the one vertical with a whole bunch of horrible horizontal dichotomies. That's what the postmodernists rail against, by the way, for all of their flaws, and I think there are flaws in Derrida and in Foucault. But I do think there is great insight that, like, modernity is hypocritical because it rejects the ancient world's dualism of the natural and the supernatural, the vertical dualism, only to adopt a whole bunch of horrible horizontal dualisms, right? And so you reject those dualisms and you say, what is before, beneath, between, and beyond the subjective and the objective? That which, grounds, binds them together. That's the really real. And when people experience the really real, think about even when you've been in a flow state, which is on the continuum. When you're in the flow state, you know what that's like when you're doing something and it's really demanding and you got to stretch your skills and give it your full attention. And you start to feel at one with it. And you start to feel like the world's in you and you're in the world, and that egocentric sort of nattering narrative goes away and you're completely absorbed, and it feels so real and you're at your best, and it's the optimal performance that Csikszentmihalyi talks about. Like, when we experience the really real, when we disclose the depths of how we experience and actually make sense of the world and come into meaningful contact with it, non-dualism becomes pronounced in our awareness.
I remember you discussing with Jonathan Pajot recently this concept of the fourth transcendental,
Yes.
like even beyond kind of relations and substance, like there's almost something alive about like a kind of, and it kind of feels like it relates to this. And
Yes. So I mean, so let's do the so we're using transcendental now in the medieval sense, not the Kantian sense. So the Kantian sense is transcendental are the conditions of knowing. The medieval sense of transcendental are the conditions of being known. It's a radical shift. It's part of Kant's Copernican revolution. So truth, goodness, and beauty are the primary dimensions through which reality is known. They are the transcendentals. Whenever we're trying to know anything, we have to try and get to it through what's true, where true doesn't mean a proposition. It means that trothing, that being connected with something, being true to it. Beautiful, where the appearances are not deceptive or distracting. They're disclosing of, they beckon us, they call us into the depths of something. And goodness, the thing is both, has a for itselfness and a for usness to it that allows us to be in relationship to it without ever completely consuming it or absorbing it into ourselves. That's the truth, the goodness, and the beauty. And I think there's a fourth transcendental, which is, like you said, the fact of like communing, the fact that both relations and relata are equally primordial. They come from this, that the best icon for being is community, because there are no persons without communities, but there are no communities without persons. And that community of personhood is both between people and the world. I think that's the fourth transcendental of intelligibility, of meaning.
Of meaning, yeah. Because do you think that then that the goodness, truth, beauty that we typically talk about, there's something that they kind of like all afford together when you kind of see
They're
their
in
fullness?
communion with each other, such that we can be in communion with them, and that is the fourth transcendental of meaning. So I'm doing a course. I'm doing a series of courses on the Peterson Academy. I hope that doesn't alienate some of your audience automatically. Jordan promised me I would have complete academic freedom to teach how I wanted to teach, and he has been true to his promise. He's always been true to his commitments to me. So that doesn't mean I don't criticize him philosophically or politically, but personally, he has always treated me with respect. So I'm giving that back to him, as I should. But it's based on the work of D.C. Schindler, where he talks about the primacy of beauty, the centrality of goodness, and the ultimacy of truth. And I've already done the primacy of beauty, the centrality of goodness. I'm going to do the ultimacy of truth, and then I am going to do the primordiality of meaning.
If you like St. John's Gospel, do you get anything out of the Apocalypse, Revelation?
No.
Interesting.
I mean, and even Luther wanted it removed from the Bible. The Book of Revelation, I don't think it was. I mean, I've talked to people and I've read some scholars that they don't think that's written by the same guy who wrote, or the same school that wrote the Gospel and the Epistles. The vocabulary is different. The syntax is different. It's much cruder, much different structure, much different themes and images. And
Interesting.
my concern about that book is that book is the epitome of concern I have for the Bible of a whole, which is the Bible is a very dangerous book. Most sacred texts are dangerous. It's like in Narnia, is Aslan tame? Oh no, but he's good. Like sacred books aren't domesticated. If you can domesticate them, then they're useless. And so the Bible, like all sacred texts, the Bhagavad Gita is a dangerous book. The Tao Te Ching is a dangerous book. And if you're not picking up on how it's dangerous, if you're not being vulnerable to it, then just put it down and stop reading it, because you're just sort of pleasing your self-esteem or something, right? So the Bible's dangerous, but the book of Revelations is particularly dangerous. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christianity, and that book was used to terrify and terrorize people. And it's been the cause of unending bloodshed. And when I try to stack what good has come out of that book in the lives that I've seen touched by that book or in the history that I read, I can't see any good. I can't see any good. I'm sorry. You asked me a question, I'm going to answer it.
Yeah.
I don't see any good. I have never seen any good in it for me in my life, and I'm willing to be vulnerable before the Bible. I've not in the church I grew up in, the extended family I grew up in, no good came out of that. The repeated misuse of that book to cause massive amounts of bloodshed and terror in the world. No, I do not think well of that book.
So in what sense, like in personal or in your family, what did it do?
I came home one day and I was filled with the fables of the rapture, which are interpretations of the book of Revelation, which is an impossible to interpret book. And there was nobody home, and I was convinced that the rapture had occurred, and I had not been taken because I was a sinner condemned to hell, and the Antichrist and his minions were coming to get me. I have been in my hospital bed as an adult, and the doctors looking at me, and I could tell them from their eyes, because I was really sick, oh, this guy's going to die. I was not as scared then as I was scared when I was the 10-year-old thinking the rapture had occurred and I had been left behind. That is the most utter terror I have felt in my entire life.
It's interesting because I think Orthodox Christianity, it doesn't read it in church, and it kind of has like, it doesn't say not to read it, but I think maybe it's like maybe sort of an idea. Perhaps it's a kind of Protestant, when we kind of try and we have all these interpretations, and we sort of like, there's a way in which, without a living tradition to sort of appreciate what, like, where should this text go, and like how should we think about it, it kind of becomes something which, people make all their own conclusions from it, right? And then
I think so. I take your point. It's very similar to the recommendation I give for people who are using psychedelics. You need a set, you need a setting, you need a sapiential framework of practices that you have regularly and reliably been practicing for quite some time, and you need a sacred story that you share with others. Then you can use psychedelics. And it sounds to me like you're recommending the same thing with Revelations, because that book is like a psychedelic trip. It really is. Anybody who claims that they understand that book, I have never been impressed by the interpretation. And I'm usually, and I've tried to be even better at this, I'm usually a very charitable listener. I really try. But that, nope, no.
Mm-hmm. What are you've talked a bit about it already, but what are you most interested in at the moment? Like, what kind of things sort of make you excited?
Well, like I said, I'm very excited to try and come into a deeper relationship with the person and work of William Desmond, and the work of Yanaris. Unfortunately, he's dead. I'm hoping to talk to Norman Russell, his greatest protege, and then the work of Mark Wynn, who I hope to reach out to, who's just astonishing. And the idea of the recovery of the senses, the spiritual senses. What does spiritual sight mean? What does spiritual touch mean? What does the spiritual body mean? The subtle body. All of that, and how that is deeply resonant, because I believe it is, with some of the best cutting edge, rigorous for e-cognitive science, and trying to integrate that all together to provide a way in which people can practice falling in love with what's really real, so that they can individually and collectively, well, as I said, awaken from the meaning crisis.
Mm-hmm. Like with that last person you mentioned, like, it reminds me of an interest I have at the moment of like thinking about like saints and their kind of like
Yes.
religious experiences they have versus like someone who just like takes a load of
Yeah.
of LSD and is like, it's like, what is like, and sometimes it's like almost like a more of a touch and even like more subtle, and I don't know, but nevertheless more real with the like saint that like
Well,
is
there's
not
more.
like
There's more.
trying to.
There's more
There's much
long.
to it, but
Yeah. Sorry, I
go on.
interrupted you. I apologize. Go
No,
ahead.
no, go on. It's I find that interesting.
There's more transformation and transfer. The problem with most psychedelic trips that do not have those four S's around them is it's an experience rather than a transformation, and it doesn't transfer into the cultivation of realization of and virtue, wisdom, in many domains of their life. In fact, it just remains an isolated experience that they maybe treasure, but it's not doing any work in them. It's not educing them. Education originally comes from educe, draw out. It's not helping them mature.
Mm.
And so I mean, I
Interesting.
work in the psych. I've just been invited to be a keynote speaker at the interdisciplinary conference on psychedelic research. So I think psychedelics are important. I think the psychedelic renaissance is very important. But I think what that research is pointing to, and many people would say this, is you need a really pronounced philosophical religious framework if you're going to be doing psychedelics, and it needs to be shareable with other people, or else you're probably putting yourself in danger of some very significant self-deception, self-destructive patterns.
Mm. Mm. I've learned so much from this. This has been really nice. Any way you want to point people?
Yeah, a couple places. I mean, so you can see behind me the book "Awakening from the Meaning Crisis" on the bookshelf.
Mm.
Part one. There's the video series that's on YouTube. The book I think is better than the video series. It came out a couple years afterwards, and Chris and I reflected on it with the help of Madeline. Then if people want to go beyond talking or listening and they want to study, I have an online platform called the Lectern where people can join and take
Mm.
courses. A lot of what we're talking about here, we've gone over in much greater depth, much more careful detail because we have more time. A series of courses called Seeing God Again for the First Time, or Realizing the Imaginal, proper. What role does the imagination play in this waking up to a greater reality? Or Literature and the Meaning Crisis, or Einstein and Spinoza's God. These are all these courses that are available. If you want to move beyond listening to videos, if you want to move to study, and then connected to that, there's retreats and other things. If you're interested, this is not a cult. If you're interested, because if you want to go beyond the non-propositional, if you want to cultivate the skills and the perspectives and the identity change, that takes practices. It takes rigorous practice. It's like learning a martial art or learning meditation. That's also available if you're interested.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, that sounds very, very interesting. And yeah, and I'm seeing the one, the Imaginal, and I don't think I could come for some reason, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they're all up there.
They're all up
afterwards,
there, and even if you can't, I mean, the advantage you have in person is obviously you can ask questions. If you pay a little bit more, you can have a one-on-one tutorial session with me. But if you don't want to do any of that, and I understand that, you can do all of this asynchronously. There's a way of doing it asynchronously.
Nice. Thank you, John.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Jack.
day as well.
This has been a great pleasure. You have a good day too.
All right. Thank you.